Hello, my name is Cherry Cheeks. Today we're talking all about me. Ooh, Cherry Cheeks. And you, and finding your burlesque name. A burlesque name or a drag name or any kind of performer name, it is more than just a name. It is an identity. It is a description. It is your persona. It is a symbol of you and me and all of us as a collective. Burlesque names can come in many different ways and many different forms. Before you even debut, you need a name and you need to have something that's catchy and envelops the essence of you. Before you commit to a name and you have a couple of ideas, maybe you're thinking, maybe my name will be Cherry Cheeks, maybe I'll go with Cheeky Cherry, maybe I'll go with The Cheeks. When I have a couple of things, make sure to do your research. There are a lot of performing styles that tend to overlap. We have very similar concepts like having our own performer name. Go onto Google, go onto Facebook, go onto Instagram, Twitter, any social media you can find, and Google Cherry Cheeks Burlesque, Cherry Cheeks Drag, Cherry Cheeks Model, Cherry Cheeks Roller Derby. Even as a producer, make sure to always Google or look up as much as you can those different names that you want to use, and you're going to find a few different things. If you want to be Cheeky Cherry and you look up Cherry and then Cheek together in a Google search, maybe my name, Cherry Cheeks, will show up, and you'll see that I have a website, I have Instagram, I have Facebook, and I'm just like a human who produces and who performs as well. And there's a lot of names are one of those really interesting concepts in burlesque where some people insist on being unique. They want to have that as their brand and they don't want anyone else to touch it. And some people are gonna say, you know what, it's a hobby. I don't really care if someone across the country has the same name as me in Nova Scotia. I'm just doing it for fun. But the thing about burlesque is just for fun can always expand. You never know what you're going to be like in 2 years, if you're going to continue with burlesque or if you're going to expand and decide to travel and tour, and if you decide to maybe compete and apply for festivals. And if you do decide to do that, you're going to want to have a name that stands out. You don't want to have two Cherry Cheeks. Many performers have worked for really hard to get their name out there, or really hard to even think about their name. Maybe you have a name that's based off of a font. 10 years later, suddenly a lot of performers start naming themselves after fonts or after colors. Very things like names can always expand. They can always transform over time. They have their own trends, just like our acts do. There are going to obviously be some names that are going to be very popular. Names like Cherry, Scarlet, Ginger, names that have puns, names that have a play on words. There's a lot of names that are going to overlap. The best you can do your research in the beginning, the easier it's going to be for you to later on get your name out there and get your presence built. If you do your research in the beginning, then it's going to be easier for you to change your name. It's really important to know that you don't have to commit to a name right away. I know many performers who've changed their name 6 months after their debut, finding something that works better with them, or 10 years later. There's many reasons for that. Maybe your name, you don't identify with it anymore. Maybe you feel like you've changed as a person. If my name was like Explosive Cherry, and turns out I'm not a very explosive performer and I'm more of a sultry, slow burn kind of performer, maybe I'll change that as I develop in burlesque. A lot of the time I've seen performers actually get better names than that name anyways. Then you can have something that's going to stand out for you. You're not going to be stepping on anyone else. You're not going to be mistaken for anyone else. And so when you think of a name, people are not going to call me Cherry Cheeks to my face every time. Some people might have nicknames. It's a name, so people are going to call you a nickname. They're going to call you by your first name or your last name, whatever's easiest. And next up, after looking at that, what do you want your name to say about you? In the very beginning, you might have no idea. You might just be like, I'm just doing burlesque. I'm just taking my clothes off on stage. I'm already overwhelmed with creating an act. I don't know how to even think about a name. Like, how? How? First of all, what are some names that you like? What's your own personal experience in life? What are certain things you might love about the world around you? Is there a name or a character that you might have had as a child growing up, or even as an adult? You can do some fun things. I like alliteration. I was thinking about all of these different alliterative names for myself when I was new and I was thinking about burlesque. Some of my names, I had actually quite a few names. I was thinking of things like Anime, because I liked anime. Turns out there's an anime that already exists, Anime Allure. I did not know about her until quite a few years later, but now I know, and I'm glad I didn't pick that name. Zora Waters was another one I thought of because I'm a huge fan of The Legend of Zelda, and Zoras were my favorite creature or race in the games. And Water is just really nice because it like kind of flows together. I was thinking about Anya Good for a long time. I was really, really committed to Anya Good up until I think a couple weeks before my debut, because Anya Good, I was like, that is a good pun. That is like solid in your face energy. But for those of you who've watched my videos in the past, you might know I was actually quite shy, but somehow I was like, yeah, I'm taking my clothes off. It will be great. So Anya Good felt too powerful for me, and I didn't feel ready for that name because I was like, I feel like I have to be like this bomb energy and this like I'm in charge energy with that name. And then so I just started playing with alliteration. And Cherry was a name I used to always love. I used to see characters with the name Cherry in movies or on TV or in books, and I always loved that name. Eventually I came up with Cherry Cheeks. Of course, I did not do my research at that time. I did a little bit, but not nearly enough to realize like exactly how common Cherry was. And there's been so many times in my burlesque life when I've been tempted to change my name, but now I'm so connected to the name that literally describes who I am, and I'm okay with that. So even if you pick a name that is pretty common, if you're not going to be the only Cherry, commit to being the only Cherry Cheeks. No one's going to be like you, and no one is going to be as unique as you, or have your own style, or how you perform, or how you create community, or produce, or whatever you do. No one's going to do it the same as you. Again, what is the energy you want to come out? With a name, it can be something simple like a first name and a last name. It can be something that's like one name, like Cherry. Maybe it's an actual description: the main attraction, the body electric, the velvet unicorn, the Toweltan temptation. That one's my tagline. You don't even have to have a name that sounds like a name. It could literally be a description, and then you can be like this really mysterious, kind of ominous, ethereal kind of being beyond burlesque or beyond your human self. And do you want it to be exciting? Do you want it to be sultry? Do you have a persona yet, or do you think you're going to kind of develop it as you go? Hint: you're going to develop it as you go. If you have something cute and bouncy, like I was saying, Cherry Cheeks, it's very upbeat. It's very says who I am. It is a pun. Do you want your name to be a gender-neutral name? Do you want it to be heavily femme or masc? Do you want it to be something that describes your culture? If you have a name that is cultural or maybe longer or hard to pronounce, there's a really big colonial discussion that we see all the time in burlesque. I think we need to get rid of the concept of you have to have a name that's easy to pronounce. There are so many cultural languages and words and dialects and sounds that we don't all have. Very, very few of them we have in English. If you have a cultural name, I highly recommend that you put in brackets every time you send a producer your name or your bio. If you have words that describe it, have in brackets how it's pronounced. And even with that, when I meet with an MC before a show, I double check. I'm like, hey, I just want to make sure you know how to say my tagline or my name, and I'll have them say it back to me a couple of times to make sure they got it. We won't make burlesque more accessible to people of different cultures until we accept that that is part of how we exist as people. And of course we're going to have names or taglines or phrases or words that like really hit home for me or you, but isn't going to hit for everybody, and that's okay. And be persistent. Even if people say your name's too difficult, be persistent. We should be grounded in our names and like feel confident in them. Some other ways you can think of names is you can think of alliteration, like I said. You can think of nouns and descriptions. There is Ruth or Dale. There are certain names you won't get until you hear it out loud. Ruth Ordero is one of those. Polly Short. I have a handful. World famous Bob. Paul Noir. Are you a fan of April O'Neil? What about April O'Peel? She's hilarious. Are you somebody who likes to be first at everything or maybe last at everything? Producers have their own way of advertising performers and listing them on posters. Some will list the people who've been around for a long time that people know first and then go down the list. Some producers will list it alphabetical. Names that start with an A, B, C, the first few 10 letters of the alphabet, you're going to be higher up on all of those lists. If you have to wait in a lineup, if they're doing alphabetical order for registrations or different things, then that might be something that you want to consider. But to me, that's a very minor detail, but I know some people do like to be first on a list or closer to the top if they can. And going back to cultural names as well, if you are not part of a culture, don't try to have an exotic name. Don't do it. If you're not indigenous, don't have an indigenous name. That's it. I just know a lot of people who have Asian or exotic sounding names. It's not for you. Those names are for those communities and those cultures and those people. Those are some of my tips that I have for burlesque names. I know it wasn't a whole lot of this is how to make a name, but these are just some things to keep in mind when you make a name. Otherwise, if you have questions, leave them down below. If you have comments or tips yourself, I would love to see advice and tips with how you came up with your name or tips for what you recommend people do when they figure out their burlesque names. Otherwise, I'll see you next time, and I look forward to seeing lots of ideas and concepts in this description. Bye!